just, it's like a cultural thing. The expectation is you're not supposed to date. You're supposed to meet somebody, get married, and, live a
Figure it out after
conjugal
that.
life, as they say, right? Like, and
Is that
that's,
really the case now, though? I feel like,
and that's,
things
yeah,
have shifted a
I'm,
lot.
I'm curious, how it's evolved. Again, like divorce, for example, that even 20 years ago was huge taboo,
Yeah.
Yeah.
in our culture. I mean, it continues to be a taboo in every culture. There's no question about it. But I think, people have started becoming more open about it. But in our culture, certainly it's tabooed. It's deemed as a failure, which I would
Yeah.
say all cultures, I think they still stigmatize being divorced. But it's now I hear more and more in Bangladesh where it is becoming okay, I guess.
Normal.
Like you're
Yeah.
not like, ostracized.
Nope.
And again, I am speaking about a small circle of people that we all, are
Yeah.
part of that. I'm not talking about all of Bangladesh, but
I
you do
think
see it
that,
more.
yes, I think you do see it a lot more, but I also think that has a lot to do with the socioeconomic background of the people who are in the
Exactly.
relationships or the ones who are getting divorced. If you're talking about someone who grew up in sort of a middle class household, for them this might still be a taboo. And I speak this as someone. My parents got divorced in the 90s.
Yeah.
They did it when they were in Canada. So we moved to Canada within a year. My parents separated, and it was awful. It was probably, like, for my mom, it was like a suicide sentence for her socially, because
Wow.
she would never get invited to anything. She was completely ostracized. It wasn't just socially, and especially a place like Vancouver, where we had maybe 20, 30 Bangladeshi families. Everyone sort of knew each other, and you could it was just like, it was so stark, the people that supported my dad and completely shunned my mom down.
Oh,
Yeah.
And
wow.
similarly, back home, when she would talk to her family, they still would push to, keep the family together. You have two kids.
Yeah.
Nobody ever looked at her, and nobody ever said that, okay, do what's best for you. We support you no matter what.
Hmm.
Do what's best for you. And that sort of trickled down with me when I went through my relationship. Um, and when I had my divorce, forget the divorce, even when I was getting married, the whole conversation was around the fact that আমরা তো কখনো বিশ্বাসই করতে পারি নাই যে আমাদের মতন একটা ফ্যামিলি, যেখানে একটা ব্রোকেন ফ্যামিলি মেয়ে এত
Mm,
ভালো একটা প্রস্তাব পাবে, এত ভালো
yeah.
একটা ফ্যামিলিতে
Yeah.
অ্যাকসেপ্টেড হবে। আমরা তো কখনো এটা বিশ্বাসও করতে পারি নাই। Similarly, even when I was growing up, the neighbors, or like the other Bengali families or aunties, they would have their talks or whatever. They thought I was some delinquent, or I was going to turn into some sort of a delinquent. Yet, I went to one of the best universities. I had a scholarship. I did whatever I needed to do to excel in my life. And I
Yeah.
did it. It was almost to prove them wrong. It was like the
Mhm.
gene was to prove them wrong. It wasn't because I had some, high achieving big goals or anything. It was just to say fuck you to their faces.
Yeah, it is.
Good
You
for
bring up a
you.
good point because you're right. I mean, my gosh, your parents' generation, I can't even imagine
Exactly.
taking
So
that
long
leap
ago.
of being divorced, and it always goes back to why is it the woman's fault? Like, oh, you
Mm-hmm.
didn't work hard enough to keep your shongshar together.
Yeah.
But what
Yes.
about the dude in this? Like, it should be 50-50. And it is interesting, like the marriage dynamics in many cultures, including ours, where there's this expectation that the woman is supposed to take on more responsibilities and the man is supposed to, you know, feed us
Work.
and like
Yeah.
work and make money, and then the women are supposed to do everything else. And so a lot of times the psychology is, well, you need to just accept certain things
Yep.
because he is the man of the household, he's taking care of all of you, and many times the women aren't working, and so they are helpless, that even if they wanted to get divorced, what are they going to do?
Yes.
They can't go back to their family because, you know, their parents are going to shun them. Oh, well, you didn't work hard enough, or deal with it. Even if it's crazy things like, well, he's literally having an affair.
Yep. It's never his fault.
It's
It's never his
never,
fault.
or it's not that
ছেলেরা
it's
তো
not
এরকম
his,
করে, এটা তো ব্যাপার নাই।
exactly.
Exactly.
It's not just that it's not his fault. It's you just have to accept it because look at your life. You're living this great life. You have everything, like you have children, a home, you know, just accept these, you know, limitations or whatever.
Yeah,
You know what the
Um,
funny thing is? That is what I thought. I don't know if that was actually directly said to me, but I feel like part of our grooming in growing up is like you grow up as soon as you know you graduate high school and you go into college. It's like me be your time hoye geche, or you graduate college and it's like I had be your time par hoye geche.
oh yeah,
And so right, or you have to have at least some plan as soon as you graduate college. I feel like it was a little bit more different for us, where it was like, yes, it's expected, you get a job, you are independent, you do all
right.
those things. But in parallel is this pressure to, like, you're put out into the world on your own. Most, I think many of us at the time, you leave your parents' house, you get a job, you don't know how to navigate the work space. No one teaches you that. I moved off to a completely different city. I went from the suburbs of the South to uh, the East Coast. And so you're trying to figure that out. And then at the same time, you get like, you know, your mom or an auntie calling you like, oh, আমার এই ছেলে আছে, এই ছেলের সাথে কথা বলে দেখো, কিছু হবে না, just কথা বলো, just কথা বলো। এখন কিছু করতে হবে না, just তোমরা কথা বলো। And then you start doing that and you're like, wait, this is so weird, right? I mean, I could go through so many awkward stories. So nobody actually is like, this is what a relationship is. Because even in that process, it's about chile ki kore, chile family ki
ফ্যামিলি
kore,
কি করে?
biodatas. Remember, it's like chile
Mama,
baba,
chacha, choddo goshti.
mama,
Yeah,
chacha, bhai, bon, everybody. And it's like, who is he, right? He looks great on paper.
right.
Um, but then after you know you find someone who looks great on paper, family matches, check check check, and then you get into it and you're like, what the hell? I don't know what to do from here. There's no, like, what is a shongshar kara? And then they'll give you advice, very vague. Shongshar korte hobe. And it's like, well, I don't know what that means.
Like, do you remember home economics or whatever that a lot of our
Yes.
parents' generation took?
Learn
Like
to make
being a
bucks.
homemaker,
Yeah.
we don't get taught any of that. We don't get taught how to manage finances. Just certain things, you know, that are bare minimum things to know in life. I don't know why no education actually covers any
Yeah.
of that. That seems like a big
But it's
miss.
also like, there's that, but it's also like, I mean, I don't know about you guys, but having a boyfriend or any kind of like more than a friend relationship with a boy or with the opposite sex is like you don't talk about it.
Yeah,
It's all hush hush. So that doesn't help either. And
that
if it
part
does happen
is
to come out, right, dhara pore gele, that's like also completely shut down.
mhm.
And you don't learn much from that.
And that's when they like force you into some arranged marriage because they're like,
Yes.
make busy fast, take us fast, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But that is
Yeah.
crazy, right? To think about how many of us did things behind our parents' backs because we knew that we would get in trouble, like dating, for example. Um, it's just, yeah, it's such a big miss that I hope that never happens with our children, where they feel like they're not allowed to tell us these things, and we were just like, oh my God, we will be locked up.
So I've been in therapy for almost 4 years, I think, almost. And it all started because I was going through like this process of, do I get a divorce? Do I not? Am I right? Is it right for, like, am I making the right decision? Am I not? Once it all happened, I then started going into this phase of kind of evaluating, like, what do I do next? And am I going to make the same mistake again? Because in my mind, it was always like, and, you know, once I said I was getting a divorce, nobody said this to me, but, you know, it comes out here and there from different people where it was like, well, you married him. Like, didn't you know
Mhm.
this
Right.
before? Didn't you catch this? You should have known. And I think that stuck with me, even though it wasn't like the first message that I got from people, but it comes out.
Right.
Um, and then I was like, okay, how do I know I'm not going to make this mistake again? So then I go through this with my therapist, and a lot of it comes down to um, kind of like the guilt and shame you feel from what you did when you were a kid or what you did when you were a
Mm.
teenager. And that is like, she's like, it was probably positioned to us or to me, like, this is so wrong. You're supposed to study, you're supposed to obey and move on. But she's like, these are very normal things. Like, all kids, like, this is child psychology, this is teenage psychology, curiosity, all those things happen. It's very normal. But that shame or guilt or whatever that was, many of us, as she was saying, because she's also Indian American, so she also has understandings of like our culture and the duality we live in. Um, and she's like, it's not an uncommon thing for you to feel this, and then it actually impacts how you make your decisions and who you end up with, or if you want to not be with them, how how it impacts that. And so we had to dig pretty deep and go pretty far back just so I can feel better about knowing if I were to be in another relationship again, that I have the tools and understanding of how to evaluate it because I didn't. It was like bhalo chakri, bhalo gari, bhalo family, and that's
Right.
it.
That's it.
So how did your family and everybody else react when you decided you were getting a divorce?
So I always thought that I would get a divorce because I saw red flags and other things pretty early into the marriage. Um, and so I was like, oh, you know, it'll change. It'll change. I can change him. It never changed. And so I always thought that once my parents die, I would get a divorce. So I was just kind of like gritting my teeth and living life the best I could until that happened. Well, not until that happened, if it were to happen. Um, but then my dad got sick. And so when that happened, I think that was the turning point for me. It was a lot of back and forth to go help take care of him. Maya, you guys were in Dallas, like the All Buck 30-year
Mhm.
I remember.
celebration we did. Like he was being pushed around in a wheelchair. Like he went from cancer diagnosis to death in 5 months. And so and that turning point was when I spent so much time in Dallas with them and I started to realize who I was again. Like this is who I am. Like I'm happy here. I'm happy with these people. I'm happy in these situations. Um that recognition or that awareness started popping into my mind more and more. And then the last day, so like Maya, you guys left to go back home. That was the same day, like everybody in the family, whoever was in town for it, started leaving. And everybody kind of knew that this was the last time they would see my dad, or we
Mm.
would like see him in a state where he can like speak to us and interact. So I think I got super emotional at that moment. And once like the last person, I was the last to go. So I think my sisters left. I was sitting in the kitchen table and I don't know what came over me, but I was like, I'm miserable. I was like, fuck it. I'm not going home. I'm not going back. Or if I'm going back, I'm bringing Manal. I'm coming back and I'm not going back. This is more important to me. You guys are more important to me. Um, and I started telling them everything I was going through, what I felt. And my dad said nothing. He sat on the couch. He said nothing except for when I was finished. He was like, "You do whatever you have to do. We'll support you no matter what." And I think they also kind of knew, but they could never tell me.
Mm.
So that was a turning point where it was like, here I was thinking, I'll never have support. I have to do this on my own. And then lo and behold, they're willing to support me the whole time. It's just nobody knew when to say something.
Yeah.
That was the
You know, it's
switch.
Hassan Minaj has one of his Netflix shows where he talks about log kya kahenge, like what will people say,
Yes.
log ki bolbe, and a lot of the sacrifices we make or choose to do is because we're so worried about what everybody else is going to say.
Yeah.
মানুষ কি
And
বলবে?
yeah, and
Mhm.
so it's the same situation with like divorce. Is one, it's even more of a pressure when you basically married someone um through what they used to call love marriage, right, versus arranged marriage. It was someone that you met on your own and
Yep.
decided to marry him, and now you're like, okay, this isn't working. So there's all that pressure, and none of it, I always feel like it's actually not coming from our parents. The pressure is from the
Right.
society, because our parents ultimately love us and want us to be happy,
Exactly.
but they have a hard time even, encouraging it, because they're like, oh my God, now I need to go to all these dawats where they're going to be like, Allah, mere ki holo,
And it's true.
Yeah.
And that actually happens. Or people will be like, ki hoise? Ashole ki hoise? And it's like, what do you
Exactly.
think hoise?
Yeah.
It didn't work. Like
Yeah.
people would blatantly, like uncles or whoever would be like, Balato? Ashole ki hoise? And it's like,
Oh my God.
what do you want me to tell you?
Yeah. And it's
It's
like
weird.
everyone's calling each other, they're all talking about it. And I hate to say this, but it's also, some people truly enjoy seeing others fail, or
Oh my
you
gosh.
know what I mean? And so
Yes.
for
Yeah.
many, it's like, ooh, finally so and so's, family is struggling with something, or
Mhm. Trouble in
and they'll
paradise.
yeah, and they'll pretend like, oh my God, I care so much, but then they're just talking shit. Because they're like, oh, আমার ছেলে তো এরকম হয়নি, আমার মেয়ে কখনো ডিভোর্স হবে না, or
Mhm.
oh, এই মেয়ে হিন্দু বিয়ে করেছে, and then like literally 10 years later, that person's daughter is marrying a Hindu, and then it's like, oh,
Yeah.
what's up now, biatch? You know.
It's so
um
true.
so
But you,
Yeah.
what was your experience? Because you married
a white
Damon.
guy, yeah. So again, all very similar, right? So this is another stigma, which I think has changed and evolved a lot, marrying people outside of your culture. Because again, the expectation is we must all marry Muslims. Many are
Mine
not
was
even
Bengali, not
practicing Muslims,
Muslim.
or Bengali. What? So
Yeah.
there's must be Bengali and must be Muslim. I think mine may have been must be Muslim first and then must be Bengali. I don't know what you
Ours was Muslim
prioritize.
last.
And some are not very religious, like for example, marrying, you could care like you're not, super practicing, so why should I impose that on somebody else?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so there are people that are like that, and then someone comes and is like, you can't marry a Hindu, oh my God. It's like, well, that person may be a practicing Hindu, why should that person convert because of me when I don't even
Yeah.
follow a lot of that? But I mean, in my family, there were others who married outside of our culture. I wasn't the first, at least like on my mom's side, which definitely helped the cause. But the first person that did, it was a big to do. Because again, many of us come from families that are very cultural, especially in America, because we want to maintain that culture. We want to
Yeah.
maintain, speaking Bangla, all that stuff. And then to get that shock of, wait a minute, you're not marrying someone that's not Bangladeshi, or not Muslim. I mean, these are all expectations that our families, they literally raise us with those expectations. Like if nothing else, do that, the bare minimum. And it's not like my parents are
He didn't
super
convert,
religious.
did he?
I'll tell you the story. So my
Oh.
parents, my mom is definitely more religious. My dad, I don't even think he knows how to pray. That's how different,
He sounds like my dad.
yeah, I mean, it's just they're not super religious, but I think the expectation from my mom was always, you need to marry somebody that's Muslim. And when I started dating Damon, I always told him that, like, look, I don't know where this is going, but just so you know, this will never work unless you converted or whatever. So when we were maybe dating 2.5 years or so, I brought him to my cousin's wedding, and that was probably the first time he met many of my family members not my parents. My parents didn't live in the U.S., but all my other, kala, mama, pupus, and all this stuff. And the cousin the wedding I brought him to, that cousin was actually marrying also a white guy.
Oh,
So,
nice.
and that was kind of like our first foray to marrying, like non-Bengalis. So, so she had her Islamic like religious ceremony. It was like a much smaller event at my uncle's house, and Damon basically was like, and he had this conversation with me before we got there that like, he was going to convert. And so the
Wow.
imam who married my cousin then stayed back, and there were like a bunch of men that took Damon to one room, and
It
I
happened right
was
there?
yes, and I was in another room because the men and the women can't be in the same room together. I don't know why, but well,
Oh,
I
wow.
I do know why.
Yeah.
We're never in the same room, right? Even in mosques, they try to segregate us. So, it was like my kalu, my mama, they were all there. And mind you, like literally Damon just met all these people. And I'm like in the other room, kind of like trying to listen in. And the mom asked him, like, why do you want to convert? And I was like, oh my God, please do not say it's for a girl. It's not like that. And I honestly didn't even know how it really worked. I've seen it in the mosque where you say the shahada and 3 times, but I don't really know the process. And so they sort of asked him a few questions, and he had read, um, you know, at length about the religion and all the things, and he said all the right things in terms of like why he wanted to convert,
Oh,
and it had
wow.
nothing to do with like he never mentioned like because it's for a girl. He said all the the traits of the
Yeah.
religion and the values and all that stuff. Um, and so yeah, he converted in front of my whole family, and we were not even engaged. So I was like, oh
Wow.
my God. And so for many, many years, he was like the favorite Jamai because they
Of
still
course.
remember, like,
Nobody
He
had to
knew he
ask
wanted
him.
you, yeah.
yeah, this dude converted before anything. Because, I mean, fast forward, we've had several other people marry outside of our culture. And it's always like, he was already a Muslim before he even got engaged to she.
Wow.
And so, yeah, so he converted. And I think that was probably the most important thing for my family was that, she's still marrying a Muslim.
And
And
they all
so, yeah,
saw it, so they were like, you had a whole bunch of
They were
exactly.
all
witnesses
there.
too.
Yeah, and again, this is not a easy thing for everybody because I've then had many other, not many, but like several other girls approach me and say like, hey, like how did you not get away, but like how did you have
Yeah.
these discussions or navigate this conversation with your family? Like I'm dating a white guy. And I always say, look, I was fortunate that Damon was not super religious and his family wasn't, and nobody was like absolutely not, you can't convert, we're going to disown you, because there are many families that are super Catholic or
Mm-hmm.
Jewish that are like no, or Hindu that are
Yeah.
going to, they'll disown their kid. And so for me that was something that I was very lucky with, that was never a conversation on his side where they questioned it or anything like that, because that's not always the case. I think I was very lucky in that scenario.
So that's interesting. And that makes me like amazing for Damon
Yeah,
and lucky for you
yeah.
for sure. Um, but it makes me think about like another stigma. And I want to ask Maya, when you were going to marry Fuad, there's also this stigma around like if you are a widowed or divorced, you can only ever marry
Yes.
someone who's also widowed. Like it never comes up like someone who's never married, never had kids, can be married to a divorcee. Did you like was there anything like that when you and Fuad?
Um, well, that I met in like very weird circumstances, right? We went into that story before. We also eloped, so I didn't tell my
Mm.
family that I was getting married. When my family found out that I was going to be going to Bangladesh for 6 months, my dad kind of had an inkling because he would hear me talking to Fuad. At that time, I moved in with my dad. So all he said to me was, don't do anything that, no, his exact words were, I raised you to be an honorable young lady. Don't do anything that will cause me to bow my head in shame.
Mm.
Yes, that's
Yeah,
very common.
those
I've
were
heard
like
that.
his exact
Oh,
words. And yeah. And like when I think about it now, and I think it's so much pressure to put on a person to say something like that. I feel like when I went to Bangladesh and, well, then I kind of started dating at that point, and I would be seen in a lot of public places with him, and that made me really uncomfortable. And I'm a modern girl. I have had boyfriends. I lived on my own, but still, for some reason, in a Bangladeshi context, in
Context.
Bangladesh, it made me really uncomfortable to be seen at like a hotel, because they would go on tour and we
yeah.
would stay in hotels. So for me to walk in
Oh,
with him, it made me so uncomfortable, which is one of the reasons why we got married so early, because I couldn't take it. It just made me really, really uncomfortable. So as soon as I kind of figured out that this was the person that I wanted to be with, I was like, let's just do it.
So
Um,
when you say elope, like, did you go to like did a imam marry
a
you guys,
kaji?
or how did you elope?
Kaji. It was
Kaji,
a
kaji,
kaji.
that's the
Really?
word, kaji.
Uh-huh.
Really?
So as soon as we started dating, he would tell me literally every day, "Chalo ajke biye kori, chalo ajke biye kori." He would introduce me to his family. His family knew this is my background, that I've been divorced and everything.
Yeah.
I was very lucky that nobody in his family ever raised an eyebrow. His
That's
family
great.
and extended family, they all welcomed me with open arms. They would talk silly behind my back, but I knew they were all saying good things. They were extremely welcoming, and they were extremely sweet. My shashuri actually said to Fuad that I don't even want to meet her until you get married. Like biye
Wow.
kore tarpore dekhao, because he had sort of a long-term relationship before me that didn't work out. So, and his mom, knew the family and all of that. So this time around, when we were together, he just basically said, "I biye tiye kore niye aisho, then we'll meet." So
If
yeah.
she had a daughter, I don't know if she would have said that to her.
Well, they have a history of
That's
eloping.
actually
Fuad
interesting.
and all of
Yes.
both his
His brother.
brothers, all
Yeah.
three of them,
Oh, really?
yeah, they
Yeah.
all eloped, and yeah. Um,
Keeping with the
so
tradition.
keeping with the tradition, I didn't get the divorcee, therefore I have to marry someone divorced, but coming from Canada to Bangladesh, and especially my mom had a really hard time accepting my divorce, the first one, because
Mm.
she's
Oh,
still very good friends with my ex's mom and family, and especially because the circumstances in which we separated were so, it was really vague. Nobody was really at fault. If anybody was at fault, it was probably me. He's a great guy, and he's a good friend. So the way that everything happened, it just, I guess it's not the traditional way, where people separate and there's a lot of bad blood.
Yeah.
We
yeah.
separated, yet we were always each other's greatest cheerleaders, and we still are.
Wow.
But what my mom would always tell me was, I think there's a stigma around people in the entertainment industry, especially in Bangladesh,
Oh yeah.
that, they're, I don't know, you're gonna have to censor this out. Like,
Players.
do
Oh,
drugs, or they do,
beep beep. Yeah.
What is the word?
you're gonna have to blur that one out. I don't think because we're
What? This is
We'll
staying in,
explain
but
later.
yeah. So
No, it's
basically,
not staying in.
meaning they like sleep around, right?
right.
Like people, yeah. So people in the entertainment industry, they're just,
Yeah.
it's like it's a very lusty industry, I
I don't
guess.
think that's just a Bangladeshi entertain.
Yeah, yeah.
We say
In
that about
general.
everybody in entertainment.
In general, but I'm sure that if it was, somebody in the West, then nobody would have batted an eyebrow. Um, Especially if it was somebody famous, it'd be like, oh, please go ahead, like
Mhm.
now you'll be rich and famous too. But yeah, my mom had a hard time with it because she thought that, what is my daughter getting into? But it was after them getting to know Fuad that they realized that he's like the biggest family guy that you can,
Right.
even imagine. And his priorities, everything has been all geared towards the family as opposed to anything else. Um, so yeah, it was the opposite. But I think the most difficult thing that I had to face with my divorce was because my mom had gone through a divorce. I thought that she would be
Mm.
more on my side. But now when I think about it, I also,
Oh,
when I went through therapy, we kind of had this conversation over and over where it came out that perhaps the reason why she was telling me to not get a divorce or for me to stick with it is because of all the stigma that she faced, you know?
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So like when I think about it now, obviously, I don't I forgive her for everything. And I'm grateful that my dad, on the other hand, was like, this is your life. Whatever you do, I'll be there for you no matter what. তুমি একটা
Mm-hmm.
রিক্সাওয়ালা বিয়ে করে নিয়ে আসতো আমার কোনো অসুবিধা নেই as long as you're happy. And that's exactly what I needed to hear at that time, not যে এটা তোমার দোষ বা এটা তোমার দোষ তুমি ফেরত
Right.
যাও, আমরা কখনো
Yep.
চিন্তা করি নাই তোমার এরকম বিয়ে হবে, মানে it's just so much guilt and shame, it's just nobody needs that at that point in life. Yeah, but I'm definitely, when I think about it now, so lucky that I never had to deal with the fact or deal with the stigma of being someone who was divorced and had to get married again. Never had to deal with that.
That being lucky or being so fortunate or grateful, I think about too, because I can't imagine. I'm sure we all know somebody who's feels stuck,
Oh yeah.
and either for financial reasons, for lack of family support, or these very extreme values their family may have that's so opposite from
Mm-hmm.
what they're experiencing, then it turns into like it's not even about them and the marriage anymore. It's just like you're stuck, you have no way out.
Yeah.
And I feel like that, I wonder, I mean, who knows, but I wonder how common that might be. Or because, okay, divorce ho jawar par, luckily your parents and Fuad's family and everything, like everybody was very open-minded. But some people also are like, what next? Like my
Yeah.
life is completely like you were saying your mom is like the suicide, because it's like nothing, what will ever become of me? Because I'll
Yeah.
have people even ask me like, how did you do it? Like,
Mm-hmm.
not even why did you do it, but how did you? And I think like everybody can speculate why. The how is really hard. I think it's a hard thing to do, but I feel like for me it was a little easier because fortunately, like I'm independent. I'm independent financially. I'm independent in all these ways that I could figure it out and sustain my life afterwards. But there's so many people who can't. Or
Yeah. That's
they just can't. It's not even about won't. It's not even about the will. They don't have the means.
exactly. I mean, there probably more of that than someone like
Than
you,
you think.
honestly. Um,
Hmm.
and it's a lot of I think it's also hard to disappoint your parents. And
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of these decisions impact more than just you. It should only impact you, but the
Or your
truth of it
kids,
is,
if you have kids.
yeah,
Yeah.
the truth of it is it expands more than just you. And so then you're like, oh my God, this is, is it worth it? Maybe I should just be
Hmm.
miserable because everyone else will still be happy. But
Hmm. Yeah. Kids get in the, not in the way, but kids come up a lot. I mean, Numer was one, like his first birthday, we celebrated his first birthday as we were going through the divorce. And so I'm sure there was many people who had asked, you know, kind of around the bush
oh
about
yeah,
that or thought about it to be like, well, if you're going to get a divorce and you knew the whole time the bacha holo keno, right? Like people
yes.
say those things, or
Or
এখন বাচ্চার কি হবে?
yeah. Or if
Or
you
what?
are having problems, right? Marriage problem, একটা বাচ্চা নিয়ে নাও, একটা বাচ্চা
বাচ্চা
নিয়ে
নিয়ে
নাও.
নাও।
Oh yeah, right.
Dude,
There's
that
that
is like the
too.
worst advice.
Yeah.
You're just making it
It's
even worse. Like
mhm.
throwing in a child, it's like you're already drowning. Now throw me a child so I can, it's
Yeah, and
horrible.
that is like on top of financial and all these other things, like to have another child What do you
Mhm.
do? But I also think people also feel, and I've heard this across cultures, is what will happen to my kids? Like their life will be miserable. They're going to be
Yeah.
miserable. You feel so at fault if, something happens and then your kids are all messed up or whatever. It's like, but I think the reality is that if you're miserable and you're
Oh
miserable in your
yeah.
relationship, that impacts more. Like
They
I
can tell.
actually told this to my mom. Yeah, like I've seen more people with parents who are together who are so miserable and so angry and so like unhappy. Like what's the difference? It doesn't make a difference whether your parents are together or not if
Exactly.
they're miserable.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree
For sure.
100%. I think if there's anything that my parents' divorce had taught me, especially now, because my parents are actually best friends. Like they're divorced. Like my
Your
my
family,
mom.
I'm sorry, I have to say this, like from the beginning, and I've known you for so long. I
It's
had
so much.
none of these things, but your name. They wanted you to be so independent, like all of it. I
They've
love
always
it.
been
I want to meet
progressive.
them.
Oh
Yes.
my gosh. Yeah, like my parents now, they vacation together. It's my mom and my stepdad, who's a Shada. He's a Caucasian man, my stepdad. And then I
Wow.
have my dad and my stepmom, who's the greatest cook ever.
Oh
That's
yeah.
right.
And they
That's
vacationed
gourmet.
together. Yeah, they came to see when I had my daughter. They came to
That's
see her
right.
ekshate. They've gone. They went somewhere. I think somewhere in Europe. They had traveled together.
Wow.
Yeah, it's bizarre now when I think about it because I would tell them that growing up when my mom got married and then when my dad got married, there was a lot of tension between them, especially like my
Yeah,
dad
that makes
married someone
sense.
who was in Bangladesh and she came to Canada and she was maybe a little intimidated by the whole situation because my mom is very bold. Um, but now they're like exchanging recipes and hanging out with each and they
That's
live
awesome.
literally across the street from each other. There's
What?
a road. Yeah,
What?
my mom lives on one side and my dad lives on the other side. They're neighbors. They travel together. They hang out together all the time.
Wow.
And yeah.
This should be like a
So
sitcom
it
or
is
reality show.
totally a sitcom, but I think the greatest thing that I've learned from them is that you can love each other and not
Yeah.
be in a relationship together. I feel like
Mm-hmm.
the two of them individually have taught me so much more about how to like
Mm.
sustain a relationship, how to figure out what the red flags are, and
Yeah.
how to cherish a relationship as opposed to them being together and just being miserable and me growing up seeing that.
I think it's also great to hear that your parents both remarried. And especially your
Yeah.
mom, because again, the pressure always goes back to the woman, where it's like, well, how dare she move on or do anything to make herself happy again, right? Like you already fucked up, you got divorced, so now you just show that you're miserable for the rest of your life. That's kind of the
Yeah,
expectation, and so it's great to see that, she remarried and she's happy, and so is your dad.
Totally.
Like that's, I think about you marrying, like now what for you? Like is there some expectation that
I'm
like
still going through therapy.
right? Like, is it like you should never get remarried, or like, do you get pressure from your
Funny enough,
family?
nobody has said anything. Nobody's asked, nobody said anything from my family. Um, like my younger cousins or whatever, they'd be like, "Well, tell us what's really going on. Like, are
Yeah.
you dating?" and that kind of stuff. But um, no, like oddly enough, and I don't know if it's because is it too soon? Do they think? Do they know how to bring it up? Are they seeing that I'm so happy in my life the way it is now? Like, we don't want to rock the boat. Is it because I
Yeah.
have a 4-year-old? Like, "Ekhono bachcha koto choto." Because there's also a stigma around like
Mm-hmm.
whoever you marry, will they accept? Not even a stigma. I mean, I do. I worry about this too, but they have to accept my kids,
Yep.
right? They'll never be their own. I mean, I would hope one day you treat them like they're your own kids, but I don't even have that expectation of like you don't have to take care of my kids. Just be kind to them, be open to them, but like I got them. So I don't know. I don't know. I haven't heard anything. Sometimes I think one auntie asked in front of my mom if I was dating, and I wanted to like crawl into the ground.
Well,
because
the Bangladeshi person?
oh yeah.
How did they
I mean,
say
she's
it?
like
Did they
the
use the word
cool
dating?
auntie. Yeah.
Okay.
She's asking her mom, she marrying ki date korche.
Oh my God.
And my mom's like, Jani na oke jiggesh koren. Right? And I'm like, I wanted the what do you say, mati pak hoye jaake? Like that's what I was hoping.
Right.
But again, I'm 40 something years
Yeah,
old,
it
42
is.
years old. I have children. I've been married once. Like
And you're
this
still
can't
mortified.
be.
Do you think
Yes.
that, like, I wonder if it has something to do with the fact that because you're also very financially independent, that, it's sort of, you don't really have to if you don't want to.
Yeah. 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 Someone also once said that, oh no, money. It was more like, যদি তোমাকে কেউ বিয়ে করতে চায়, it's probably because they want something from you. Because you are
Green card.
financially independent. Like, what?
Green card.
Green card.
Oh, did that say? You don't have to be financially independent for that.
Yeah. All you need is a blue
That's
passport,
expected.
man.
Yeah. No, but it's like, oh, like people say
Yeah.
the funniest things when you go through these things because you're just like, what are you? They're like be careful of the douchebags because there'll be more douchebags out there that'll want
Mm.
what you have more than who you are.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, actually,
I don't know.
that also makes me think about, this expectation that when you get married, your partner, the male counterpart should be more successful,
Right.
should be, making more money than you. And that has changed a lot in our generation in terms of those expectations. But that's a problem with, like all of us, we are all financially independent, but when it
Yep.
comes to marriages, they're always looking for someone that's better than you, higher level, higher education. And again, it goes back to why can't, the female be
I've heard
the
someone say,
breadwinner?
I've heard someone say, আমার মেয়ে এত ভালো চাকরি করে, ওর যোগ্য মানে ওর মতো যোগ্য
Yep.
ছেলে আমরা মানে এরকম আমরা পাবো না.
Yeah.
Right?
Or like,
And I'm
you
like,
have girls that are who are doctors, and it's like, okay, unless the guy is also a doctor, they're not good enough, right?
yeah.
And I think, the boys are also raised to think that way, and they feel like, you're questioning their manhood if they, are marrying like a sugar mama, right? Like it's
Oh
and
yeah.
and I think, again, that's not just like a Bangladeshi thing.
Yeah.
It's
Or the girl is a gold digger.
right.
Like that happens
We have
too.
that. Mm-hmm.
Because, every mother, I'm not everybody, but like all chiller ma, right? It's
Oh
like,
gosh.
chiller,
Uh-huh.
chiller. That
Right.
exists.
Yeah.
And nobody's good enough for their chiller.
Right. Exactly. So yeah,
Have any of you have had to deal with that?
in terms of like
Like
a
relationship
prostab
even.
that, or
Yeah.
I never went through this whole prostab thing. Like I never got any of those.
Lucky you.
I did have a biodata that we discovered. So one time, a bunch of my cousins, we were, I don't know, on the computer. This is when like the household only had one computer, right? Like you had to ask like the dad of the family, like, can I use the computer for 5 seconds? And we were using it, and we found like this file, and it was literally all of our biodatas. All the girls in the family had one.
Oh yeah, because those are created without you knowing, by the way.
Oh my god.
They're all made behind your back. They're all made
Yeah.
behind your back.
So I
I
know
don't
I
think I
had
had that.
one, but yeah, I didn't go through the whole like prostab and all that. No one was like,
course.
"Hey, Tushi, তোমার জন্য একটা ছেলে আছে, you Harvard-এ পড়ে, business major, like
Just কথা বলে
World
দেখো,
Bank,
কথা বলে দেখো।
World
ক্লিক
Bank
হয় নাকি দেখো,
পেয়েছে."
ক্লিক হয়।
Yeah. But I have gone to some of these with like for my cousin, where it's like they meet at the mall, and
Or our own.
they have to have escorts, right? Like this is in America, like in New York, where it's like
Yeah.
"Prostab আসছে," they're gonna meet in the mall. Tumra jao, like we're the escorts, and then the guy has some escorts too, and we just like linger in the mall while they.
So awkward. And what do they do in the mall? Like
they just talk, and it's so awkward. They've never met each other situation, right?
It's like you go somewhere that's super loud.
Yes.
Oh, I once had that at Disneyland, Disney World.
Oh, a
Really?
date?
Yes. No, it was like families meeting each other as opposed
Oh
to
my
at
God.
Disney
Oh
World,
my
Magic
God.
Kingdom.
So can I
Weirdest.
tell you, like, why do parents think that they can do one over us? Like, you know what's happening.
Oh yeah, yeah, of
Yeah.
course.
আমার একটা ব্যাচমেট আসছে, ব্যাচমেটও কিন্তু ডিজনিতে থাকবে, জাস্ট আমরা লাঞ্চ করবো একসাথে, and then all of a
সুন্দর
sudden
করে
it's
সেজে
like,
নিও, হ্যাঁ। এইটা
yeah,
পরবে না, এটা পরবে না, এত শর্ট শর্ট পরো না, গরমে মরে যাচ্ছি, এই কাপড় পরো না।
and then they show up with their one
সালোয়ার
son,
কামিজ
and
পরে
you're
যাও।
like, yeah,
I
they
didn't
show
have
up with
that
their one
experience.
son, and you're like, well, that's a coincidence. And it's
Oh.
like the same age group, and you're like, oh, I wonder what's happening here.
And
Yeah.
you're always
I
on
had
watch
one of
then
those.
anytime
It
they
was
take you
so-
somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
What?
I had a very awkward one. We went on vacation, Bangladesh, and it was like my dad's old colleague or something like that. I had no idea what was going on. So Bashaye, we're like waiting, you know, Bashaye nastar jonno wait kore. She
Oh
told
my.
her son to get cha for us. And ছেলেটা
সিনেমার মতো।
basically tray niye cha niye,
Oh
What?
my God.
like it's the opposite.
Opposite.
It was the opposite. I was sitting there with like my dad and my family, and this
Your
guy
parents
comes.
like, yes, you serve the cha.
That's
He
right.
comes and he served me cha, and he was so interested. We talked and everything. Basha যাওয়ার পরে, like his family like loved me. I don't know what the heck it was. I didn't even talk. But they wanted to go and like move forward or whatever, and I was like, this is so weird. Like, no.
I love that it was exactly the opposite scenario
It
for
was
you.
the
Yet
opposite.
again.